Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Sridhar Krishna. I'm a researcher at Takshashila Institution in Bangalore and working on a project called 20 million jobs. We feel that in India has like 18 million people who turn 18 every year, and we have a large number of people who are surplus in agriculture. And unless we have at least 20 million people getting new jobs every year, India is going to have a crisis on its hands. But today we're going to talk about Bihar, and to join me in this conversation is Dr. Sudhanshu Kumar, who's an associate professor at the Center for Economic Policy and Public Finance at Patna. He previously worked as a full-time faculty with the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy in New Delhi, and also with the Indian Institute of Management in both there. He has a PhD in economics and from the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai. And he finished his MSc in economics also at the same institute. His areas of interest include econometrics, Indian economy, applied microeconomics, and public finance. And for me, the biggest interest is the fact that he is in Patna, and we want to have this conversation about the economy in Bihar and what can be done to sort of make things better for Bihar. Right? Welcome on the show, Dr. Sudhanshu.
Thank you, Sridhar. So, thank you. Nice to be part of this show.
Yeah, so when I look at India, India has this, I talked about India having a large unemployment problem, right? And India also has a big problem of poverty. And our per capita income is like about $2,000 on a nominal basis. While if you look at the variations between states, it's even more alarming, right? So if I look at a state like Goa, it has a per capita income close to $7,000, and which is comparable to countries like, on a nominal basis, comparable to countries like Dominica. But if you look at a purchasing power parity basis, it's almost as rich as Russia. That's Goa for you. On the other hand, and Goa is probably amongst the least populated states, right? While if you look at Bihar, which is the second most populous state in our country, it has a per capita income which is at $675, close to that of countries like Togo in Sub-Saharan Africa. What do you think is the reason for this vast variation in per capita income across our country?
It's an interesting point that we have started. As you have mentioned, that there is a huge disparity among the states in India. So, if I say this in other words that you have said, same thing. So, but if you look at the per capita income for, say, 2020-21, at constant prices, we measure that the 2011-12 numbers. So, Bihar's per capita income stands at 31,017 rupees per capita income, and India's is 86,659. So, if we look at in percentage terms, Bihar's per capita income is 35% of the all India level. And if we compare this with, say, Haryana, per capita income of Haryana is 1,63,992. So, Bihar's per capita income is just 19% of the all India average per capita income. So there remains a huge disparity, and this is like if we are looking in terms of outcomes of per capita GDP or something like that. If we turn the page and look in terms of availability of fiscal resources, so even in terms of fiscal resources, per capita fiscal, there is huge disparity, which we call that horizontal disparity is there. So what are the reasons behind that? One is that when we take numbers in per capita terms, so the population comes at the denominator, and the state has a huge population. So the state has 8.4% of the all India population. So when we say that 8.4% of the population, and geographical area is around 3 point something per percentage. So this is population burden is such that it requires significantly higher resources compared to the other states. And if you look at the structure of the economy, population density of Bihar as per the 2011 census is 1106 per square kilometer, whereas India's population density is 382 per square kilometer. And as we said, Bihar has 8.6% of India's population, but only 3.1% of total urban population. So urbanization remains very low, and the rate of urbanization, which sometimes we say that okay, urbanization can be. I mean, very often many people see urbanization as an engine of growth that can generate employment. So urbanization, in if we look at in Bihar in 1981, it was 9.59%, and which would increase just to 11.3%. So from 9.6% to 11.3% between 1981 to 2011. Whereas if we look at India's story, so it was 31.2% in 2011. So urbanization remains much lower. Fiscal resources are limited. So that somehow highlights the fact that there remains a huge disparity among the states. And yes.
Yeah. So, Dr. Kumar, I think when you talk about urbanization as a huge issue, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think one of the ideas that we came up with when we talked about creating more jobs in India was saying that no country really has managed to get its per capita income to close to $10,000 per annum without at least 65% of its population living in cities, right? So with India still has a large number of people who are in our villages. We are less than 50% urbanization in our country even today, right? So, but when you look at the numbers that you talk about for Bihar, you're talking about 11.3% as the urbanization level. It begs a question. I mean, so why is it that there is such low levels of urbanization?
Yes, so the answer lies in the fact that there is absence of private economic activity. So urbanization or the urban center develops around the centers of economic activity. So if those centers of activities are not there, so creation of new urban centers becomes difficult. So Patna, like if we think about Bihar, before getting into Bihar, as you had said that if we look at Tamil Nadu or say states like Kerala and other states, Tamil Nadu has almost half of the population lives in urban area. So not the level at which we think in the let's say the world average or the developed economies, but at least Tamil Nadu's urbanization is around 47-48%. Compared to that, Bihar is nowhere. And answer lies in the absence of private economic activity. So most of the people live in rural area. Why so? Because the only activity is agriculture. So around more than 50% of the people still are dependent on agriculture, which is more of to support their survival. So if unless we switch from the primary economic activity to secondary, there is a little scope for. What happens in Bihar is that Patna remains only urban center. So even if we compare in terms of say airports, so Patna till recently Patna was the only airport for 13 crore population living in the state, and that too with the huge number of migrant population who usually frequently migrate outside the state for their job. So there remains a demand, but the absence of urban center. Recently, a new airport has started functioning at the Anga, but still it remains lower. Yes.
So you talk about agriculture and most people in Bihar being engaged in agriculture and employed there, and there being a lack of private economic activity where alternate jobs can be provided. But when we see this situation, even in India, across all other states in India, if you look at people in agriculture, I mean, even though over 55% of our population is in agriculture, only 15-16% of our GDP comes from agriculture, which means the GDP per capita income of somebody engaged in agriculture is not very different from the numbers that we've seen for Bihar. Would you agree? I mean, is it essentially just the structural fact that most people in Bihar are in agriculture, and agriculture as an economic activity is very low, very poor in generating income, and therefore, unless that changes, we will not change. Is that your point?
The story of Bihar is slightly different from the All India story. It is true that the contribution of agriculture in GDP has come down over the year, And that is true with respect to Bihar also. The share of agriculture in GSDP, we say gross state domestic product, has come down over the year. But the people dependent on the agriculture has not come down at the rate at which happened at the all India. So what has happened is that subsistence level agriculture remains to support the subsistence in a sense that so small farm holding that this is something somehow you are engaged into the activity that just helps you out in for survival. So and those areas where the agricultural activity happens. So if you look at the geographical spread of Bihar, so it can be broadly divided into north and south Bihar. So north means let's say the river Ganga passes and it divides Bihar into north and south. So North Bihar has abundance of water. So many rivers flowing from Nepal Himalayan region flows through North Bihar, and that it's that region fertile. The region is fertile, but the dependency is so much that the per capita income from the agricultural activity remains low. But at the same time, what happens is that when per capita income coming out of agriculture is low and it remains as activity which helps just survival, people migrate from the state to outside. So this is the region, this is the North Bihar, which sees a lot of seasonal migration of people going to, and these are unskilled workers mostly. So they migrate to the states like Punjab, Gujarat, Surat, those textile industry. Even in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, many places you will find these unskilled workers. They go there, earn for a few months, and then come back to the state. So this is the structure which it is.
So it's, I mean, all through mankind, people have either companies and private activity will go towards, private investment will go to a place where there are people, or people will go to where there is private economic activity, right? So in Bihar, if there isn't enough economic activity, then as you say, people in Bihar don't have much of a choice but to migrate to other states seeking employment. But when so if you look at states like Kerala, I mean Kerala also does not have so much so many big industries or in manufacturing or in many other areas. But nevertheless, people in Kerala seem to be like, having, there are lots of remittances which come from abroad. There are various other income generating things. And therefore, Kerala as a state seems to be doing fairly well.
So
Right?
very interesting point. This is interesting. So if you look at the different regions of the world, the migration do happen, and in search of a better employment opportunity, people migrate from one place to the other. So, but if we look at the kind of migration which happens in Kerala and compare the amount of remittances that comes back to the state versus the amount of remittances that comes back to the state like Bihar, or the kind of job opportunity for which people are migrating. So that there is a huge difference. So when people migrate from the states to say Middle East, or say people from Gujarat migrate to United States or in Australia or Canada, and what they send back is much higher than what people send back to Bihar. So, and that also, when if you have the size of remittance is higher, the society will have higher per capita income and the society will grow much more than that. So what happens in Bihar is most of them are private security guards working there, or unskilled workers in supporting agricultural activity in Punjab or in textile industry, earning 10,000, 15,000 per month. And that too for a few months they'd come back and say that, okay, that's enough for the year. And then, yes.
Yeah, in fact, I think you and I were having this conversation a few days back, and you mentioned something interesting to me. Would you like to talk about that? I mean, how we saw advertisements for apartments in Delhi, in newspapers in Patna.
This is interesting. Yes, it's interesting observation that you have pointed. So what happens is that over the year. So before we get into that episode, we need to have just a background that what is happening in migration from the state. So both this migration is happening not only for job, even for education purpose, people migrate from the state to the other states, like say for higher education or even for engineering. So for BTech students go to Karnataka, private engineering colleges in Karnataka, in West Bengal, Durgapur. For MBA, they will move out of the state because there are not many good institutions, private institutions in the state. So that's the fact. So now what happens is that when people migrate to the migrate outside the state, and the level of urbanization is low back home, so most of them they get employment outside the state and they start working there. And the interesting phenomena what has happened is that people have started living or shifting outside the state. So if we look at the Hindi newspapers in say remote rural areas, so these newspapers have district editions. In most of the newspapers, what we observe is that there are advertisements of apartments being built in say Greater Noida or in Delhi, and they advertise that come and buy at this rate. So it's surprising that apartment is being built in New Delhi and it's being advertised in Bihar. So that tells a story that people might be interested in purchasing properties out there. They must be interested in going there. Now, what we infer from this interesting phenomena which is happening is that most probably if somebody has a surplus income is planning to move out of the state, well, surplus income is not being invested in the state, that in a sense says that there is a little hope that in future also some economic activity would take place, as we would agree, and that to increase economic activity we need surplus income to be invested within the region. So that is interesting.
Yeah, so that's the big difference between Kerala and Bihar, right? So people
That's
go
true.
out to Kerala, they invest money back into the state. They come back also maybe in their old age to come and live in Kerala. While in Bihar, people who migrate and manage to find jobs, if they are good jobs and high paying jobs at least, those people sort of stay outside the state. It's
State.
only the people who are like, poorer and who where only the man migrates or one person in the family migrates, then they send money back. And these are people who are low income earning people. So
That
it's not really
up to some extent might be related to the quality of life that these urban centers offer compared to what the quality of life is there at the district headquarters in the states.
correct. I mean, it just reminds me of people leaving India to go and work in the United States or something. They
Yes.
go there, they make a life. But if you go to the Middle East, you'll probably come back. But if you go to the United States or Europe somewhere,
Similar story, yes, yes.
it's
So
just
similar
similar.
story happening, and it is an interesting story because this is happening within country. So there remains huge disparity, and then the disparity in terms of economic activity and the behavioral differences that is there with respect to the job that they are.
So thank you very much. And I'm going to come back to you. We're going to take a short break. And then when we come back, we want to now change track a little bit. We want to talk about what can be done to change this. Because I'm an eternal optimist and I don't believe that, like, there is some place on this planet where there is no hope, right? I think there are things that can be done in a state like Bihar, and I think we need to, might take time, but I'd like to hear from you about ideas for making progress. So just bear with me for a few minutes while we take a short break. Okay, welcome back. So, Dr. Sudhanshu Kumar. So, we understand that this is the situation, that there is a lot of unemployment in Bihar, that we talked about it. I don't know if you mentioned the statistic, but the unemployment in Bihar is at like, twice the national average in terms, almost twice the national average in terms of unemployment. But what do you think is the reason behind this unemployment? One, you said, is that lots of people there's low levels of urbanization, there's very low private economic activity. Most people are still in subsistence agriculture. People leave the state and go out and migrate, temporary migration, seasonal migration from northern Bihar. Even though North Bihar is fertile, has enough water, and but because of the number of people who live there, the high levels of population, it is just barely enough for subsistence. So most people leave when there isn't agriculture work to be done. And South Bihar is like even worse in terms of
So as we discussed, if we relate all the discussion that we had with the numbers, so what is happening all India level unemployment pictures or workforce participation ratio if we look at the numbers. So there are differences between urban and rural areas. So unemployment is higher in urban areas compared to rural areas, and then for some of the explanations might emerge that the rural areas have this Manrega kind of employment opportunity that explains. But the difference is much higher in the state like Bihar. So when we emphasize on the difference is much higher in the state, what it says that whatever urban sectors are there, they are not in a position to offer employment opportunity in line with what is at the all India level. And let us forget about the rural for a moment for the rural unemployment. So if whatever urban centers are there in the state are not in a position to offer, what it says there is that these urban centers are most probably for availing better quality of life in terms of better health facility, better education. So somebody, if they want to provide better education to their children, would move to a urban center like Patna. If they want better treatment, they would move to an urban center like Patna, and that would lead to a higher population density in the urban center. But that urban center in general is not in a position of employment opportunity. Second, if we look at the workforce, this workforce participation ratio, which is like employment in the population, so for female, it is so negligible. So when we say that it is negligible, it is much lower than the national average, and it's a much lower than the national average means what it
Yeah,
says
even the
that
national average is quite low at about close to
yes.
20% for women,
Ye-
right? So
so if we combine these two, that presents a picture which is not very encouraging, and which when these big numbers are not encouraging, what it says that the dependency ratio might be higher, and which is higher. So in Bihar, if we look at the dependency ratio, it is 62%, which is the national at the national average it is 46.4%. Now relate this with the high fertility rate. So the population density in the state is higher, dependency ratio is much higher than the national average, and the fertility rate is also higher. So, for example, and this picture is like within a state there remains a disparity in terms of district level numbers. If you look at it, there are poor regions like poor district like Sivhar. It has a population density of more than 1700 per square kilometer. So the state average is 1180, national average is 384, but the poorest region of the state has the highest level of density. And these dense places, if they don't have natural resources and the private economic activities are absent, so what is going to happen is that the dependency ratio will be higher. When dependency ratios are higher, you as a society fail to provide quality learning opportunity for the new generation. So if the population of the state is 0 to 14 years is 46%. So if that number is higher, these young people needs to be educated properly, provided is better skill opportunity that is in line with the demand in the private sector, and that is where we can say that we'll have hope if we work on this part of the population.
so you feel that education can be the way forward for Bihar? Do you feel that if more people in Bihar were to be better educated, have better access to schools?
So when we say that education, we need to emphasize on the fact that this needs to be more than literacy rate. So you need to educate people in a sense that they are in a position to compete with the rest of the state in the country. So given that most of the people cannot get employment opportunity in government sector, and when we say that most of the people cannot get employment in government, so there is a reason that the resources with the government are limited. So as we said that there are disparity across the state in terms of fiscal resources that the government has. So if you look at Bihar, resources from its own sources is on an average, if we look at it, it's around 25%. So 75% on an average comes from the central transfers or the borrowing. So when this is the scenario, the state capacity to provide new employment opportunity is limited. Now, only hope in that scenario, only hope is the private sector. Private sector remains absent. So what is going to happen is that a major part of the population is going to migrate in search of employment outside the state. In order to find a job, they need to be better trained than what is happening. Otherwise, they
Yeah.
will
So,
be.
so there are two things that I see here, right? So one, the short-term benefit could be if people who are better trained had like slightly more employable skills, and they could then find jobs in other states and get jobs in other states which are slightly better than subsistence level, which requires some level of skill, right? Because I think almost all states in our country have enough number of people who are unskilled. We do need a skilled population. There is still a gap. Like in the ILO put out a report and said that by 2030 we will have 29 million jobs in India which go unfilled over time because we just don't have the skills required. So I think if we can find people to skill with the right skills in order to be employed, then that can be a short-term solution across our country and maybe a good solution for Bihar as well. And I think, and Bihar has a big, and I think that to me offers some a glimmer of hope, right? So if we can find a way by which people can be trained in the right skills in Bihar, then maybe that can change things in the next 10, 20 years at least. We can see some improvement happening there. But the longer, more sustainable thing is to encourage private economic activity in Bihar. What do you think are the impediments for private economic activity in Bihar? For someone like me, I studied in the 80s and I had a friend in college who was from Patna. And he was clearly an affluent chap and, whatever. But he told me when he reaches Patna, he takes a train and goes to Patna. He says like he would have to be, his father would send a jeep with a couple of gunmen to take him home. So I thought that was quite strange, and I thought he was just joking and kidding. I didn't take it seriously then. Except after many years, when I was reading about Bihar, and I said, like, there seems to be a lot of violence. It doesn't seem to be very safe. Is that the reason? Is that, first of all, how's the law and order situation in Bihar? And is it as bad as what many of us in other states sit around and think? Or is it actually not as bad? I mean, you've lived in many states and you know how it is in other states. What's your impression on that?
Interesting observations. What you have said, and some part of some similar kind of stories appeared in some of the documentaries here and there. Even BBC had a documentary when people could used to stop a train which runs parallel to the Nepal border, and people used to stop that train to take a breakfast or something like that. But that is a old story of 1980s and 70s. That might happen. But the more important point, as you have said, is that for long-term economic development of any region, including Bihar, so it takes a lot of effort in the background. So what is happening today is not a reflection of what has happened today, but what has happened in last 3 decades or 4 decades. And
Correct.
and this is a democratic setup. So one of the things is that one would wonder that is it that the political scenario is volatile in the state? So answer is no. Last 3 decades, there has been political stability in the state. But prior to that, if we look at 1970s, 80s, and 1980s, so it is said that in 3 decades we had 23 chief ministers in the state. And that was the time when major economic changes were taking place in the country. So
Correct.
when a state misses the bus, so its reflection is such that, and then later in early 90s for a decade there were caste conflicts, which is getting reflected in the story that you have said, that the gunmen were surrounding him and taking him to a place. So the law and order situation remained vulnerable in early 90s for 10 and 15 years. And that was the time when this software companies, this major transformation was happening in Indian economy, that the software companies were coming to India, many economic opportunities were happening, but none of those could happen in Bihar. Why so? Because this structurally it was engaged more into caste-based, they say that this is a rule of social justice, which completely ignored the economic justice which was required for economic development. Even if say we say that today we need to focus more on providing skill and education, it will take 2 decades to materialize that the next 2 generation would come. And if a new company has to invest, why would a software company, why would it come to Bihar? Why would not it go to Bangalore, which already has a necessary supporting infrastructure? But one exception, you would say that is Orissa, that provides a case study for a state like Bimaru state was a phrase being used. But the Orissa has been successful in attracting major investment of software companies.
Yeah. So why can't Bihar do the same? What do you think prevents Bihar from replicating what happened in Orissa?
This is so somehow was it's one answer is that the willingness of a society to attract capital investment in this state. So unless you provide a better environment compared to the competing states, you will not be in a position to get those investments. And what is happening is that being landlocked and densely populated state, state could have attracted these software companies and related. So, but if the policy focus is something else, so not many people would be interested in joining you. They will go to the place which is smooth. And Bihari students or the engineers would be working in Odisha. They would be working in, say, Bangalore. But this company would be hesitant in opening an office in Patna.
Yeah. So I understand that, and I think like is that because of a perception of law and order? Because I was talking to somebody, and they told me that it's like you yourself also mentioned that there has been much greater political stability in the state in the last 3 decades, right? And therefore, and through that political stability, it also means that there has been an improvement in the overall law and order situation. Things are not as bad as they were in the 80s and the 90s.
Correct.
Definitely. Correct? But the perception of the state has not dramatically changed over time. While in Orissa, I think,
One interesting point you have said is it's a perception of the state, and the perception of the state comes from the background of bad law and order, which has improved up to some extent in recent years. But the willingness, it's a policy design should be such that it offers a better opportunity to the private sector. Then only a private sector would be willing to invest in the state. You cannot
Hmm.
remain complacent and think that people will come, someday something will happen. What is happening is that nowadays, for example, even if we ignore for the moment that the big investments might not come up because they have better places to go and invest, if we think about this push for entrepreneurial activity, so what is happening is that is that going to happen in the state? So for that we need to look at the availability of capital. Labor is there. That labor, we can say, that might not be skilled enough to compete in with what is happening in the outside world, because the best minds would migrate from the state. That is happening. They would go out and get education from better institutes, and they will never come back. That is happening. Some of them, some cases studies would happen in the headlines in the newspaper that this has happened, that has happened. But in general, better minds would not come. So this average brain or unskilled people, they need capital in order to do, say, even in my MSME sector, they need capital. And if we look at credit deposit ratio of the state, of the scheduled commercial banks, so what is happening is that the credit deposit ratio, it's a credit being provided by the scheduled commercial bank divided by the deposits accumulated from the people living in the state. So whatever saving the state has, this state being low per capita income, obviously will have lower level of saving compared to the other states. But despite that, the proportion of saving being accumulated, being provided as a capital in the state, is much lower. It is much lower. It's the lowest in the country. So what is happening? Whatever surplus capital being accumulated by the banks, they are not lending it to the people economic activity in the state. There are two reasons. One is that they are not lending, but the other is that they are not finding suitable to lend.
yeah, I was just thinking if, like, if Bihar was a separate country, this would have if with the flight of capital happening at this rate and capital not coming in, would it have led to a lowering of the value of the currency in Bihar? Bihar would have had its own little, if it was a country, it would have had its own currency. The
So that
capital
would have
would,
led to certainly balance of payment crisis for the country. So it has
it would have
related
led
to
to but it would have also led to a situation where it might have started becoming more attractive to produce to export from Bihar, right? So you would produce goods in Bihar because the currency is lower, weaker. Therefore, it becomes a more attractive place for export-oriented industries. So maybe manufacturing in Bihar for the rest of India could have happened if it was a separate, if it had its own currency and it was on its own. That would help in maybe ensuring flight of capital doesn't happen in the way that it happens today. Anyway, it's a
yeah,
wild
but
idea.
it's an interesting imagination, and in a sense that initially you said that if this state is a country, its ranking in terms of per capita income will be much lower. It's 159 or something, and the rank that comes up.
Correct.
Now, a country which is ranked 159 among 200 or 210, so we can imagine it's about the level of currency and
Yeah.
other stuff that is happening. Yeah. So, but at the same time, like if you look at this, when the population is a major part of the population is young, 0 to say it's a 46% of the population of the state is young. So now we should be optimistic about the fact that we let us figure out something for that part of the population which
Yeah.
is that,
So
and that population cannot be left to seek a government job. So
no,
the
I agree
major
because the government job seems to be like so few, and there are riots in order when people go. Like we saw that a few months back, there were riots in Patna because people could not get those. They were frustrated about not being able to get the jobs they
So
wanted,
one
and
thing is the perception about the job also. So one is the government job, and people are like whole energy or of the society is that the kind of government job. And what is happening is that if there is a absence of private sector, people are not familiar with the private sector opportunities that are there. So they think that if you have a government job, then only your life is better.
correct. They don't even look for private sector jobs because they don't
Yeah.
know that it could be good. It's the first thing here. I mean, I look at Orissa and I thought, like, one of the things that happened in Orissa, which I observed anecdotally, I must tell you, is that like Orissa started getting up as becoming an interesting tourist destination, right? It started becoming a little interesting from a tourism perspective. And then once the tourists go there and they say, hey, this is not a bad state, maybe I can do business. Word of mouth spreads. Orissa is not bad, it's nice, it's a safe place, you can do business there. Then the government also comes up with policy designs which encourage the private sector. So, do you think that encouragement to the, I mean, Rajasthan recently, last week, I think, or earlier this week, made an announcement that they've created tourism as an industry. They've given it an industry status, which means that, the electricity charges and various other benefits, etc., the approvals for building, for doing various things become better. So they said that Rajasthan, which is already an interesting tourism destination, they are encouraging it by calling it an industry. Do you think that Bihar has potential to become a good tourism destination? And if so, can we sort of start off by encouraging that?
Interesting observation. So if you look at the India growth story, so what has happened is that from agriculture to the services sector. So the role of services sector or the contribution of services sector in gross value addition in the country has increased. It is much higher than what it was in early 1980s and 90s. The tourism sector is a major possibility in the state where there are a lot of heritage. It's also most of the tourist activity in India. Often, if we think about the middle class, it happens the religious tourism. Or other part is that if somebody like me who was studying, say in Mumbai, so would find many weekend destinations to go out. Is there similar opportunities in Bihar? So the answer at present is no. In a sense that in Orissa you have beaches, you have large temples, so some like scenic beauty is there where one can go and avail those facilities. There are some yes religious places where one can go. And interesting, one positive thing that comes to my mind is that this is the state where three major religions have their so some linkage, some origin. For
Yeah.
Hindus, Goddess Sita was born in Sitamarhi, which is in Bihar. Mahatma Buddha, he so Bodh Gaya is the place where it has a religious importance for Buddhism. Similarly for Jain people, so this Vaisali and then there are other places. So these places can be developed, but what happens is that these developments cannot happen in isolation. So the society in general has to develop in a sense that all the infrastructure resources, human capital is such that they are skilled enough to behave properly with the developments in services sector.
Because my
Yes.
view here, Dr. Kumar, is that for an outsider to visit Bihar and for capital flows to happen into Bihar, it cannot happen randomly by design, right?
Yes.
If you want to encourage the private sector, private players, private citizens of our country need to visit that state more. And one easy way of visiting that state is either Bihar sets up large number of educational institutions, and
Yes.
therefore it becomes a great center of learning. I understand that you're doing stuff with the Nalanda University, right? Now, what if you make Bihar into a great educational destination? B, it has to be because people travel there because it's a great tourist destination. These are the two reasons why somebody would go there without planning to make large investments. Then once they go there and they find that this is a good place to be, then they will go and invest money in that place and find that law and order is better than what I thought it was. There are more skills than I think we need, and therefore I think a few people can be trained to get new things. So now let's go ahead and invest in the state, right? So this is what I feel. What are your thoughts on this?
So what is that going to happen is that in order to have what all you have mentioned, so there is a need to have a concerted policy effort. For example, a state like Bihar, in order to attract more tourists, you need to have more number of airports. And the state had only one airport functioning since few years ago, Patna. And of late, Darbhanga airport is started, and you would be surprised to feel that among the Uran scheme airports, Darbhanga airport was the most busiest airport. So Darbhanga is a district bordering Nepal, near Nepal border. So many people are traveling outside the Bihar, and they might be coming back. But so this provides a case that if you open an airport, there are travelers waiting to travel through
Yeah,
this.
to the state. Yeah.
It's difficult to figure out why was it not happening in the state. So unless that happens, so the concerted policy effort is required, that you need to figure out and make a priority that what is required to push for the benefits of the services sector. Like say many people, that there was when I was at Bodh Gaya, people used to say that this Bodh Gaya management trust is there. So they would say that the Japan government in 1980s wanted to fund a road from Patna airport. There was an airport, international airport in Patna there at that time. So the tourists from Japan who travel from Patna to Bodh Gaya, which is 90 kilometer, 190 to 100 kilometer, it used to take 6 hours. So they said that we would fund and build this road, and this could not happen. When it took a lot of time to build that road. There are a lot of infrastructure development in the state, but the roads that is going to help economic activity needs to be prioritized. Yes, I mean, we should be optimistic, as you have said, that there are opportunities in the state, but a lot of effort needs to be put behind that.
Yeah. So let's start with the list, right? So let's say that you are the chief minister of Bihar tomorrow, Dr. Kumar. What are the four things that you would do?
It's,
You had
it's
full majority in government. You had full majority in government. There are no political challenges to you.
Interestingly, Sridhar, if you look at the political scenario in the state, so their last 3 decades have seen the full majority governments. So they had political stability. So what remains is that this a major concern with respect to democracy has been that the political instability might lead to lower development in a particular region. But the state has seen political stability. But what has happened is certainly the vision of the government is not in line with the economic requirement, which is what is happening outside the state needs to be studied and then implemented in the state.
So what would you do if you were chief minister? What are the four things you do? You build an airport, you told me. You build a few airports.
So for that, we don't need to be a chief minister, but yes, we can at least think of the things that needs to be done. And one is the data infrastructure. Infrastructure means that if you start building something, build it within time. One is the infrastructure which is going to help your services sector now. So you are not going to generate much employment opportunity through manufacturing in the state. So the one is the infrastructure that is going to help services sector. Other is invest in quality education. So that starts from the primary schools. So you need to invest heavily in the quality of teachers, so that they are in a position to teach mathematics, logic, computer sciences. Third is the use of digital infrastructure as much as possible in providing public services. Like if you have to register an FIR in Delhi for if you have lost a mobile phone, you can go online and register it, get a receipt, and then proceed further. But that is not happening in the state, which is producing so many software engineers and that. So this is something efficient use of digital infrastructure is required. And the fourth is that there is a need to have a bureaucratic reform in the state. So when we say that the public participation in the governance needs to be made more efficient, and that can be made more efficient through proper utilization of resources that is at hand at the third layer of the government, which is the panchayats. If they are empowered, And that cannot happen suddenly in 1 or 2 days. If you invest in quality education today, you will have a better mukhias, pradhans at the panchayat level in the estates. So if you have better people working at the local level, they can motivate people to do or create better infrastructure at the grassroots level. So these are 4 things that at least it's not very difficult. It doesn't require huge financial resources also.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think on this note, we should probably end this session. I know that it does sound like a lot of doom and gloom, right? Bihar is in great distress. It is a part of the country which has, like you said, great religious significance for Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. It has had great institutions in the past, like the Nalanda University, etc. But today, and it's also is a state which sends a large number of people into the IAS and IPS and all the high those levels. So it's not as though it's a state which is underperforming when it comes to representation in bureaucracy, in senior bureaucracy. And yet, we find that the high population of the state and some structural issues are keeping it behind. But today, if we were to focus on education, we could make a big impact on the next generation. So significant and committed investments in education sector. Then you talked about improvement to infrastructure and specific infrastructure which allows people the right roads, the right airports, and all that, so that it can be used as so. But Bihar is looked upon as a state at least through which people can travel. And thirdly, encouragement to the services sector, the infrastructure that's required for the services sector, make sure that that's available so that that can be done. It would be a big ask to imagine that we would have manufacturing take off in that particular state. But I think use of digital infrastructure for delivering public goods and services, you think, will also make significant impact. This is what I heard from you, Dr. Kumar. Any last words before we sort of wrap up?
As the story it says that there needs to be put lot of effort so that the 46% of the youth population and their story does not end to be a story of struggle and despair. And for that, all the points that you have highlighted is going to provide up to some extent some solution, and hope is there that something good happens. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.